The morning sun dappled through the trees as Daniel Reynolds helped his son load the weathered blue Ford pickup, a high school graduation gift from the year before. 19-year-old Mark Reynolds, a geology sophomore at the University of Montana, tossed his tent and sleeping bag into the truck bed with an enthusiasm only the young possess when freedom calls. "You sure you have enough water?" Daniel asked, running a hand through his graying hair, a nervous habit he had whenever he was worried. "Yellowstone can be treacherous, even in the summer." Mark rolled his eyes with a grin. "Dad, I'm going with Jake and Brendan. The three of us have been camping since we were 12. We'll be fine." From the kitchen window, Lucy Reynolds watched her husband and son. At 48, with worry lines already beginning to crease the corners of her eyes, she felt that familiar knot of dread in her stomach that appeared whenever her son ventured out from home. When Mark came inside to grab the last cooler of supplies, she pulled him into a hug that lasted a moment too long. "Mom, it's only 4 days," Mark protested, though he returned the embrace with equal force. His brown hair fell over his green eyes, a perfect match to his mother's. I know," Lucy replied, smoothing his hair back. "Call when you get to the campsite if you have a signal." "I promise," Mark said, kissing her cheek. Allison, Mark's 16-year-old sister, came bounding down the stairs. She had the same brown hair, but her eyes were a deep brown like her father's. She held out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "So you don't forget about us while you're having all the fun," she said with a mischievous smile. Mark tore the paper to find a disposable camera. "To document your adventures," Allison explained, "and because I know you'll forget to charge your phone." Mark pulled her into a quick hug. "You're the best, Shorty." At 10:32 a.m. on June 15th, 2001, Mark Reynolds waved goodbye as he drove down Oak Ridge Avenue in Bozeman, Montana. The Reynolds family didn't know it then, but it would be the last time they would ever see their son and brother alive. 3 days later, when Mark failed to return as planned, Lucy began calling his cell phone, each call going straight to voicemail. She called Jake's and Brendan's parents only to make a discovery that made her blood run cold. Neither of the friends had planned a camping trip with Mark. "There must be some mistake," Daniel insisted as he frantically dialed the numbers of every friend of Mark's they knew. No one knew anything about a trip to Yellowstone. On June 19th, Sheriff Tom Lindell sat in the Reynolds' living room, his notebook open as he listened to the family describe their last moments with Mark. "Did he mention any other destination, perhaps? Anyone else he might have been meeting?" the sheriff asked. A burly man in his 50s with eyes that had seen too many family tragedies. Lucy shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He said Yellowstone. He said he was going with Jake and Brendan." Allison, who had been sitting in silence, spoke up in a trembling voice. "He's been a little distant lately, spending a lot of time online, but he wouldn't tell me who he was talking to." The sheriff jotted this down, his expression carefully neutral. "Did you notice anything unusual about his behavior? Worried, scared, maybe overly secretive?" Daniel shook his head. "He just seemed normal, excited for his trip." That night, the Gallatin County Sheriff's Department issued an alert for Mark Reynolds' blue Ford F-150 pickup, license plate MT457KLX. The next morning, Yellowstone National Park rangers found the vehicle at a remote overlook near Lamar Valley. The truck was locked with no signs of a struggle. Mark's backpack, tent, and sleeping bag were still in the back. His cell phone, wallet, and keys were gone. The following days blurred into a nightmare for the Reynolds family. Search teams combed Lamar Valley and the surrounding areas. K-9 units lost Mark's scent in the parking lot itself. Helicopters buzzed over the vast expanses of the park. Divers checked nearby lakes. Nothing was found. At the Reynolds' home, Lucy kept a constant vigil by the phone while Daniel worked with search volunteers. Allison spent hours on her brother's computer looking for any clue he might have left. "Sheriff, I found something," Allison said one night, a week after the disappearance. She pointed to a series of messages on an online geology forum. Mark had been conversing with someone using the screen name Rockhound83 about rare geological formations in the Yellowstone area. Sheriff Lindell pursued the lead, but the user had deleted their account 2 days after Mark vanished. FBI computer technicians traced the IP address to a public library in Cody, Wyoming. The security cameras had been disabled on the day the last message was sent. As the weeks turned into months, the intensive search was scaled back. The local newspaper headlines moved from the front page to small updates in the back. The smiling image of Mark on missing person posters began to fade under the Montana sun. But in the Reynolds home, time had stopped. Mark's room remained untouched. Lucy called Sheriff Lindell every few days. Daniel drove to Yellowstone every weekend, hiking trails, showing his son's photo to hikers. And Allison, who had planned to attend college in Colorado, decided to stay in Bozeman, enrolling at the same university her brother had attended. Christmas came and went. Mark's 19th birthday on March 5, 2002 was marked with a cake no one ate, and candles no one blew out, and with each passing day the horrible reality settled deeper. Mark Reynolds had become just one more of the thousands of faces in the National Missing Persons database. A case that slowly went cold as life moved on for everyone, except for those who loved him. What the Reynolds family couldn't know was that the truth about their son and brother lay buried not just under secrets, but under the very soil of Montana, waiting to be discovered 22 years later. All thanks to a candle lit by an old woman in a rural chapel who had never met Mark Reynolds, but carried the weight of his story without even knowing it. In February of 2023, snow fell softly on the small town of White Pine, Montana, about 200 miles northwest of where Mark Reynolds had disappeared over 2 decades ago. In the tiny St. Helena's Chapel, 78-year-old Gloria Ramirez made her way slowly down the center aisle, leaning on her cane. Her snow-white hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her arthritic hands clutched a small paper bag. The chapel was empty except for the priest, Father Thomas, who was tidying the hymnals. He looked up at the familiar tap of Gloria's cane on the wooden floor. "Good morning, Gloria," he greeted with a warm smile. "You've come early today." "It's an important day, Father," she replied, her accent still holding traces of her native Mexico, despite 50 years of living in Montana. "Today makes 22 years. Father Thomas nodded respectfully. He knew Gloria's routine. Every month on the 15th, she came to light candles for her boys, as she called them. No one in town knew exactly who these young men were, and Gloria never spoke of it. She would simply come, light her candles, and pray in silence for hours. Gloria approached the altar of votive candles. From her bag, she carefully removed 7 laminated photographs, each showing a different young man. She placed them in a row in front of the candles, just as she always did. Then, with deliberate movements, she lit a candle in front of each photograph, murmuring a prayer that only she knew. What Gloria didn't know was that today something would be different. In a corner of the chapel, Jason Miller, a freelance photographer working on a story about Montana's small rural churches for Western Heritage magazine, watched the scene unfold. Moved by the old woman's ritual, he raised his camera and captured the moment. Gloria's wrinkled hands lighting a candle in front of the photograph of a smiling young man with brown hair and green eyes. The candlelight illuminated the face in the photo, creating a golden contrast against the chapel's shadows. "Excuse me," Jason said, approaching after he took the shot. I didn't mean to intrude. I'm a photographer, and that was just a really moving image. Gloria looked at him with eyes that seemed to see right through him. It's all right. They deserve to be remembered. May I ask who they are? Jason inquired gently. Gloria simply shook her head. Lost souls that no one else remembers. She then turned back to her prayers, the conversation over. 3 days later, Jason's photograph appeared on his Instagram account with the caption, Eternal Memory. An elderly woman keeps the memory of the forgotten alive in a small Montana chapel. The image, and with its powerful combination of age and youth, light and shadow, resonated immediately with thousands of people. By the end of the week, it had been shared over 50,000 times across various social media platforms. In Bozeman, Allison Reynolds, now 38, was scrolling idly through her phone as she waited for her coffee to cool in the kitchen of the house she'd grown up in. After completing her doctorate in forensic psychology, she had dedicated her career to working with families of the missing, turning her personal tragedy into a mission to help others. She had never married, never truly left Bozeman except for her studies. Something kept her anchored there, as if moving away meant abandoning Mark. Her mother, Lucy, now 70, entered the kitchen. Time had been cruel to her. Her hair was completely white, and deep lines etched a face that had forgotten how to fully smile. Daniel had passed away 5 years prior, his heart finally giving out under the weight of a grief that never lessened. Did you look at those files Detective Garza sent over? Lucy asked, pouring herself a cup of coffee. Allison nodded. They kept in regular contact with the new detective assigned to Mark's case, though they both knew it was more a courtesy than an active investigation after so much time. Nothing new, Allison replied. Just... Her voice trailed off as an image on her Instagram feed caught her eye. Something about Jason Miller's photograph made her stop. She zoomed in, focusing on the candlelit photograph. Her hand began to tremble so violently she nearly dropped her phone. Mom, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Mom, you have to see this. Lucy came closer, putting on her glasses. For several seconds, both women stared in silence at the screen where the face of Mark Reynolds, frozen forever at 19, stared back at them from a photograph held by unknown hands in an unknown chapel. It's him, Lucy finally said, her voice breaking. It's Mark. Allison was already dialing Detective Garza. I need to speak with him right now, she insisted, when the receptionist tried to schedule an appointment. Tell him it's about Mark Reynolds. We found something. Meanwhile, in White Pine, Gloria Ramirez was watching the local news in horror. Her photograph and the photos of her boys were being shown on television. The reporter was explaining that one of the images had been identified as Mark Reynolds, a student who went missing in 2001 in a case that had never been solved. With trembling hands, Gloria picked up her phone and dialed a number she had sworn never to use. They found one of the photos, she said without identifying herself. The one of Mark Reynolds. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I understand, a man's voice finally replied. Have you spoken to anyone? No, Gloria said, but they will come. I know they will. Don't say anything, the voice commanded. I'll handle this. Gloria hung up and stared out the window of her small house. The snow continued to fall, covering the world in a blanket of white that hid everything underneath. Just like the secrets she had kept for decades. Secrets that, like snow under the spring sun, were about to melt away and reveal what had been hidden for so long. In his office in Bozeman, Detective Miguel Garza listened intently as Allison and Lucy Reynolds showed him the viral photograph. At 42, Garza was known for reopening cold cases and achieving resolutions that seemed impossible. The Reynolds case had been one of the first he'd reviewed when he took the post 3 years ago. We need to find this woman, he said, pointing to Gloria in the photograph. We need to know how she got a picture of Mark and why she's lighting a candle for him every month. What none of them could imagine was that the answer to that question would not only solve the mystery of Mark Reynolds, but would uncover a human trafficking network that had operated in the region for decades, leading to the resolution of not one but 7 missing persons cases, all remembered by an old woman who carried a secret as heavy as the mountains that surrounded her small town. Gloria Ramirez's small house felt even smaller with 4 people occupying her living room. Detective Garza sat across from her in a worn armchair while Allison and Lucy Reynolds stood nearby, unable to contain their anxiety. Jason Miller, the photographer, had agreed to accompany them to ease the introduction. "Mrs. Ramirez," Garza began, his voice gentle but firm, "we need to know how you got this photograph." He held up the printed image of Mark Reynolds. Gloria stared out the window as if searching for something in the distant mountains. Her wrinkled hands trembled slightly in her lap. "I can't," she finally whispered. "I've kept this secret for so long." Lucy took a step forward, her face a roadmap of decades of grief. "Please," she pleaded. "He's my son. It's been 22 years." Gloria's eyes filled with tears. She looked directly at Lucy, one mother recognizing the suffering in another. "I know," she replied softly, "and I am so very sorry." Allison knelt in front of Gloria, taking her hands. "We need to know what happened to Mark. We need to bring him home, even if it's just to say a proper goodbye." After a long, heavy silence, Gloria slowly nodded. "My husband, Eduardo, was the foreman at the Blackwood Ranch," she began, her voice steady. "A large ranch about 20 miles from here. The owner, William Blackwood, was a powerful man in these parts." Gloria paused, taking a sip of the water Jason had poured for her. In 2001, Eduardo started noticing strange things. Trucks arriving in the dead of night, men who weren't regular ranch hands. And once, he thought he heard screams coming from an old underground bunker, a relic from the Cold War. When he asked, Blackwood said they were renovating it for storage. Detective Garza took notes, his pen scratching against the paper as Gloria continued. "One night, Eduardo went down to investigate. What he found," her voice broke, "there were people down there. Young people mostly. Some seemed drugged, others were terrified." Eduardo had taken pictures with a camera he'd brought. Lucy choked back a sob, sensing what was coming. "Among them was him." Gloria pointed to Mark's photo. "Eduardo didn't know who he was, but he took pictures of everyone. He planned to go to the police the next day." "What happened?" Garza asked when Gloria fell silent. "Blackwood found out," she answered, her voice barely a whisper. "Eduardo never came home that night. The police said it was an accident with some ranch machinery, but I knew the truth." "And the photographs?" Allison asked. "Eduardo had hidden them in our shed. I found them days later. I was terrified. Blackwood was so powerful. He had connections to politicians, to the local police. I didn't know who to trust." "Why not the FBI?" Garza pressed. Gloria looked down. "I was undocumented then. I was terrified of being deported, of leaving my daughters alone, and Blackwood, he had warned me. He said he was watching me." Silence weighed heavily in the room. "So, what did you do?" Lucy asked. "The only thing I could do. I kept the photographs. I prayed for those young people, and I kept their memory alive." Garza leaned forward. "Mrs. Ramirez, do you still have those original photographs? And do you know what happened to the people in them?" Gloria nodded slowly. "I have them, and I know where they are buried." The words landed with the weight of a tombstone in the silent room. Lucy swayed and Allison steadied her, both of them processing the devastating yet expected confirmation. "How do you know?" Garza's voice was low. "Because every month for 22 years I've watched Blackwood visit the same spot on his property, a clearing in the woods near the old bunker. Once a year he leaves flowers there. I think it's his twisted way of asking for forgiveness." Hours later, a coordinated operation between the FBI and state police silently surrounded the Blackwood Ranch. William Blackwood, now 78, was arrested as he ate his dinner. Simultaneously, forensic teams began to excavate the clearing Gloria had identified on a map. At the county sheriff's office, Detective Garza and 2 FBI agents interrogated Blackwood. "I don't know what you're talking about," the old man insisted, his authority and arrogance still sharp despite his age. "I demand to speak with my lawyer." "Mr. Blackwood," Garza said, placing the photographs Eduardo had taken 22 years ago in front of him. "We have a witness who places you at the center of a human trafficking operation. We have photographs, and right now, we are unearthing bodies on your property." Garza's phone rang. He answered, listened for a moment, and hung up. "They've found human remains," he announced. 7 bodies so far." Blackwood's face went pale. For a long moment he stared at the pictures scattered before him. Finally, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "I never wanted them to die," he said quietly. "It was only supposed to be transport, from Mexico to Canada." "What went wrong?" an FBI agent asked. "The boy in this photo," he pointed to Mark, "was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was camping, saw something he shouldn't have. My associates brought him to the ranch, but then he started recognizing some of our important clients. We couldn't let him go." "And the others?" Garza asked. "Complications," Blackwood replied with a chilling coldness. "Some got sick, others caused trouble. My partner, he had a volatile temper." In their hotel room, Lucy and Allison Reynolds waited in agony. When Garza finally called, Allison put the phone on speaker with trembling hands. "We found him," Garza said. "Mark's remains have been preliminarily identified by his personal effects. His wallet and keys were with him." Lucy sobbed softly, decades of uncertainty finally coming to a painful close. "There's more," Garza continued. "Blackwood has confessed, and he's implicated others, including a former deputy sheriff and a customs official. This is bigger than we thought." 3 days later, Allison and Lucy stood with Gloria Ramirez in the forest clearing, now an active crime scene. Forensic experts worked methodically, recovering evidence that had been hidden for over 2 decades. "I don't know if I can ever forgive myself for not speaking up sooner," Gloria said, tears tracing paths down her wrinkled cheeks. Lucy took her hand. "You kept Mark's memory alive, and now you've given us what we've been searching for 22 years. Answers." What none of them knew then was that among the documents found in Blackwood's safe was a name that would connect this case to a string of disappearances along the northern border. A name that would lead investigators to a survivor who had escaped the ranch in 2002 and had been living under a false identity ever since. A woman who could finally tell the whole story, including the last days of Mark Reynolds. The FBI conference room in Billings, Montana was thick with tension as Special Agent Robert Holden spread photographs and documents across the table. Across from him, Detective Garza, Allison, and Lucy Reynolds and 2 federal prosecutors watched intently. "The documents from Blackwood's safe have given us a complete picture of his operation," Holden explained. "For nearly 3 decades, he used his ranch as a transit point for a human trafficking network operating between Mexico and Canada." Holden pointed to several underlined names. "Most interesting is this person, Elena Cortez. She was apparently one of the people being trafficked who was at the ranch at the same time as Mark." According to these records, she was reported dead during an escape attempt in 2002. But you didn't find her body? Garza asked. No, Holden replied, and this is the fascinating part. He slid a recent photograph toward them. It showed a woman in her early 40s working at a community center in Vancouver. We believe Elena Cortez didn't die. We believe she escaped and has been living as Sofia Navarro in Canada for the last 21 years. Lucy leaned forward. She knew Mark. Could she know what exactly happened to him? It's very likely, Holden nodded. We've contacted the Canadian authorities. They're locating her as we speak. 2 days later, in a hotel room in Billings, Allison and Lucy waited nervously. They had insisted on being present when the FBI interviewed this woman, Sofia. Garza had agreed on the condition they observed from an adjoining room. A knock on the door made them both jump. Garza entered, accompanied by a woman of medium height with black hair streaked with gray and eyes that held both strength and a deep-settled trauma. Mrs. Reynolds, Allison, Garza said. This is Sofia Navarro, formerly known as Elena Cortez. Lucy stood, her legs unsteady. For a long moment, the two women just looked at each other. Then, unexpectedly, Sofia stepped forward and embraced Lucy. I am so sorry, she whispered. I've lived with this for so long. When they separated, they all took their seats. Sofia took a deep breath before she began. I was 17 when they took me from Tijuana. They promised me a job in the States, but they sold me to this network. I was moved across the border and eventually ended up at Blackwood's ranch. Her voice was firm, as if she had rehearsed this story many times in her mind. I was there for 3 months when they brought Mark in. He was different from the rest of us. He hadn't been taken for labor or the other things. What happened? Allison asked softly as Sofia paused. He was camping, taking pictures of rock formations for a university project. He wandered too far onto Blackwood's private property and unknowingly photographed an exchange of people and money. Blackwood's men found him looking through his photos at his campsite, and they brought him to the ranch. Lucy closed her eyes, imagining the terror her son must have felt. They kept him separate at first, Sofia continued, but the bunker was small. Eventually they put him with us. He told us who he was, about his family. She looked directly at Lucy and Allison. He talked about you both so much, how much he loved you, how his father taught him to fish, and how his little sister always made him laugh. Silent tears streamed down Lucy's cheeks. Mark tried to organize an escape, Sofia went on. He was smart and brave. He figured out that one of the guards left a door poorly latched during his smoke breaks. We planned to escape together with 2 other boys. Her voice wavered slightly. The night we tried, the dogs detected us. We ran in different directions. I managed to get to the woods and follow a creek so the dogs would lose my scent. The others... Did you see what happened to Mark? Allison asked, her voice a mere whisper. Sofia shook her head. Not directly, but 3 days later, when I was hiding in a nearby town, I saw Blackwood's men in the newspapers helping with the search for a missing student. Their faces. I knew those expressions. They had already killed Mark. Why didn't you go to the authorities? Garza asked. I was undocumented. I had seen Blackwood with local cops, and later I found out he had reported me as dead, so technically Elena Cortez no longer existed. I used that to my advantage. I got false papers and crossed into Canada. Why come back now? Lucy asked. Sofia looked at her with a mixture of guilt and determination. Because I have never stopped thinking about Mark and the others. I have carried their memory with me all these years. When I saw the news about the discovery at the ranch, I knew it was time to tell the truth. I owed it to Mark. In the weeks that followed, Sophia's testimony proved crucial in dismantling what remained of the trafficking network. William Blackwood was charged with multiple counts of kidnapping, human trafficking, and murder. His main partner, a man named Victor Ramirez, no relation to Gloria, was arrested in Arizona. 3 former police officers and a retired customs agent were also taken into custody. On a sunny morning in May, nearly 3 months after Mark's remains were found, Lucy and Allison Reynolds stood in the Bozeman Cemetery. Next to Daniel's grave, there was now a new headstone. Mark Daniel Reynolds, 1982-2001. Beloved son and brother, finally home. The ceremony was small but profound. Gloria Ramirez was there with her daughters. Sophia had flown in from Vancouver. Detective Garza and Agent Holden stood respectfully at a distance. After the pastor finished, Sophia approached the grave and placed a small, disposable camera on the flowers. "I kept it all these years," she explained to Allison. "Mark gave it to me, to take pictures when we escaped. He said he wanted to have memories of all of us, when we were free and could tell our stories." Lucy took Sophia's hands in her own. "Thank you for keeping his memory alive, for being brave now." Later that day, back at the Reynolds house, Gloria and Sophia shared more stories about their time on the ranch. Gloria showed them the original photographs Eduardo had taken, now crucial evidence in the case against Blackwood. "Eduardo and I always wanted to help," Gloria said, "but fear paralyzed us. I will regret that for the rest of my life." "Fear is a cage," Sophia replied, "just as real as the one that held us in that bunker. But now, we are free. And thanks to you, the families of these young people are free from uncertainty too." That night, after everyone had left, Allison found her mother in Mark's room, which had remained untouched since 2001. Lucy was holding one of her son's old t-shirts. "I think I can finally pack some of these things away," Lucy said softly. "Not to forget him, but to move forward." Allison nodded, sitting beside her mother. "Mark would be proud of how we never gave up." "And of you," Lucy added, "of how you've helped other families all these years." Outside, the stars shone over Montana, the same stars Mark had watched on his last night of freedom. But now his story was complete. His body was at rest next to his father, and his memory lived on, not only in the hearts of those who loved him, but in the justice that had finally been served. In Vancouver, 2 months later, Sophia opened a small center for survivors of human trafficking. On the main wall hung a photograph. 7 lit candles stood before 7 pictures. Beneath them, a simple inscription: "So they are never forgotten, so it never happens again." And in the small chapel of St. Helena, in White Pine, Montana, Gloria Ramirez still went every month on the 15th. But now, she didn't carry photographs or light candles alone. Now sometimes other members of the community joined her, lighting candles for those who were lost and found, keeping alive the promise that no missing person would ever be forgotten. The steady tapping of keys filled Allison Reynolds' small apartment. In front of her computer, she worked intensely on the manuscript she had started 6 months after Mark's funeral. The screen displayed the title, "The Candles of White Pine: How a Silent Ritual Unmasked a Trafficking Ring." The phone vibrated on the desk. It was a text from Detective Garza. "Blackwood sentence confirmed, life without parole." Allison took a deep breath. A year had passed since the discovery of Mark's remains, and the justice system had finally done its work. William Blackwood, at 79, would die in prison. The doorbell chimed, interrupting her thoughts. When she opened the door, Sophia was standing on the threshold. Her hair was now cut in a chic bob, her eyes calmer, more serene than when they had first met. "Ready?" Sophia asked. Allison nodded, grabbing her coat. Together they drove to Lucy's house. Today was an important day, what would have been Mark's 41st birthday. In the past few months, an unbreakable bond had formed between these three women, forged in tragedy but sustained by a shared mission. After Blackwood's trial, they had channeled their grief into creating the Mark Reynolds Foundation, dedicated to combating human trafficking and supporting the families of the missing. Lucy greeted them at the door. At 71, she had found a new strength. The closure of Mark's case had allowed her to begin healing, though the ache would never completely disappear. "I have news," she announced once they were settled in the living room. "The governor is signing the bill next week." Mark's law was a state legislation that would increase resources for investigating missing persons cases and create a specific alert system for young adults, a group that often fell into a legislative gap between Amber Alerts for children and protocols for missing adults. "I can't believe we did it," Allison said, recalling the countless meetings with lawmakers, the petitions, the testimonies before committees. "Mark would be proud," Sophia replied, "of all of us." The sound of a car pulling into the driveway interrupted them. Through the window they saw Gloria Ramirez arrive, helped by her eldest daughter, Carmen. Since the discovery at the ranch, Gloria had faced a mix of reactions in her community. Some blamed her for not speaking up sooner, while others understood her fear. But to the Reynolds family, Gloria was a hero, a woman whose silent ritual had not only kept Mark's memory alive, but had ultimately led to the case's resolution. "I brought this," Gloria said once inside, handing Lucy a small carved wooden box. "Eduardo made it. I think it belongs to you now." Lucy opened the box carefully. Inside lay 7 small handmade candles in a single long match. "So you can light them today," Gloria explained, "and so you will always have a way to remember him." The emotion in the room was palpable as Lucy placed the candles on a small dish. She lit the first one, then passed the match to Allison, who lit the second and passed it to Sophia. The small, bright flame seemed to connect them all, to the past, the present, and to a future where Mark's legacy would live on through their work. Later that day, a larger group gathered in Lucy's backyard. Jason Miller, the photographer whose image had started it all, was there, documenting the Foundation's first official event. Detective Garza and Agent Holden chatted with several state officials. A group of families with missing loved ones, now supported by the Foundation, shared their stories. Allison surveyed the scene, a familiar mix of sorrow and pride swelling in her chest. Her phone vibrated. It was an email from her editor confirming her book would be published in the spring. The world would know Mark's story and Gloria's and Sophia's, and how a single candle in a rural chapel had unraveled a criminal network that had operated with impunity for decades. "Miss Reynolds," a young reporter called out, "could you explain how the Foundation will use the funds from the federal grant you received?" Allison turned toward him, ready to explain the tracking program they were developing, a system that would connect missing persons databases across the northern and southern borders. Across the garden, Sophia was talking with a young woman who had escaped a trafficking situation the year before. Her center in Vancouver now operated in coordination with the Foundation, creating a cross-border support network for survivors. "I never thought my life would have a purpose again," the young woman confided in Sophia. "But seeing what you've built, it gives me hope." Sophia nodded, understanding completely. "The pain never goes away entirely," she said, "but it can be transformed into something that helps others." Meanwhile, Lucy and Gloria had stepped away from the crowd, sitting on a bench under the old oak tree Mark had climbed countless times as a child. "Sometimes," Lucy said softly, "I wonder what Mark's life would have been if he would have married, had children, finished his geology degree." Gloria took her hand. In my culture, we believe that as long as someone is remembered, they never truly die, and Mark lives on, not just in your memories, but in everything you are doing in his name. The sun began to set over the Montana mountains, bathing the garden in a golden glow. Allison joined her mother and Gloria, followed shortly by Sophia. The four women stood in silence for a moment, each lost in her own thoughts. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you," Sophia said finally. At the ranch, Mark talked about a special place near Bozeman, a viewpoint where he used to go to think, where he could see the whole city and the mountains. He said if we ever escaped, he would take us there. Lucy smiled through her tears. Hawks Point. It was his favorite place. He used to say he felt closer to the sky there. "I'd like to go there someday," Sophia said, "to fulfill that promise in a way." "We could all go," Allison suggested, "tomorrow, to close his birthday celebration." The next day, a small procession of cars snaked its way up the road to Hawks Point. The wind blew strong at the summit, whipping through their hair as they gazed at the panoramic view of Bozeman and the surrounding valley. Lucy carried a small urn containing a portion of Mark's ashes. After the formal funeral, she had decided to keep some for this very moment. "Mark loved this place," she said, her voice carried on the wind. "He said that up here he could see the past and the future at the same time, the city where he grew up, and the mountains he always wanted to explore." With a deliberate gesture, she opened the urn and let the wind carry the ashes out over the valley, a symbolic release of her son to the places he never got to explore in life. Gloria lit a small candle protected by a glass holder and placed it on a flat rock. "So he always finds his way back home," she said softly. Sophia set the disposable camera Mark had given her beside the candle, now a symbol of dreams interrupted but not forgotten. And Allison laid down a small bronze plaque she'd had made. It read simply, "Mark Reynolds, 1982-2001. His light guides our way." As the group stood in silence, a flock of hawks soared high above the viewpoint, their wings spread against the vast Montana sky. To some, it was merely a coincidence. To others, it was a sign. But for everyone, it was a moment of connection to something larger than themselves, a reminder that even the most painful stories can, eventually, find a kind of peace. In her mind, Lucy spoke to her son. "Rest now, my child, we found you. We brought you home, and your light will never go out." The auditorium at the University of Montana was filled to capacity. Students, faculty, and community members had gathered for the annual conference on border security and human trafficking, an event that in just 2 years had become a national benchmark. At the podium, Allison Reynolds adjusted the microphone as the last few people found their seats. "3 years ago," she began, her voice steady and clear, "my brother Mark was just another name on the long list of America's missing. Today, his story has helped change how we investigate these cases and how we support the families who live in the agony of uncertainty." Since the discovery of Mark's remains and the conviction of William Blackwood, the Mark Reynolds Foundation had grown exponentially. With Allison as its director, Lucy as president emerita, and Sophia heading survivor support programs, they had built an organization that operated on both sides of the northern and southern borders. "Last year," Allison continued, "our alert and tracking system helped locate 47 missing people. 23 of them were found alive, many of them victims of trafficking networks similar to the one that took my brother." In the front row, Lucy, now 73, listened with pride. Allison's book, The Candles of White Pine, had become a national bestseller, translated into 12 languages. More importantly, it had raised awareness about the complexities of human trafficking and the desperate need for resources to fight it. Beside her sat Gloria Ramirez, who at 81 remained a vital force in the Foundation. Her testimony had been crucial not only in Blackwood's case, but in other prosecutions against members of the network. The small chapel of St. Helena had become an informal pilgrimage site, a place where families of the missing went to light candles and find hope. On Lucy's other side, Jason Miller, the photographer whose image had sparked everything, now officially documented the Foundation's work. His photo series Lights in the Darkness, which focused on rituals of remembrance like Gloria's, had won international awards and traveled to museums across the country. This week, Allison announced from the podium, Congress will vote on the federal Mark Reynolds Act, which will establish national protocols for investigating missing young adults and create a permanent fund for law enforcement training in these cases. A wave of applause filled the auditorium. Detective Garza, now the head of Montana's new Missing Persons Department, nodded in satisfaction from his seat. He was instrumental in taking the state legislation to the federal level. But today, Allison continued, I want to talk to you about something even more important than laws and systems. I want to talk about memory and how it can be turned into action. As Allison spoke, Lucy thought about the long road they had traveled. The pain had never completely vanished, but it had evolved. It was no longer the paralyzing abyss it had been during those 23 years of not knowing, but a motivating force that compelled her to keep going. The night before, she'd had a long talk with Sophia, who now ran 3 survivor centers, the original in Vancouver, one in Seattle, and another newly opened in San Diego. Sophia had confessed something she had wanted to say for a long time. Mark saved my life, Lucy, she had said, not just physically by helping me plan the escape. He saved me by showing me that even in the worst circumstances we can choose who we are and how we act. He never lost his humanity, not even when he knew he was probably going to die. Those words echoed in Lucy's mind now, as she listened to her daughter speak about her son's legacy. We cannot change the past, Allison was saying, but we can transform it into a catalyst for change. Every missing person has a name, a story, a family waiting for answers, and they deserve to be fought for with the same tenacity my mother fought for Mark for over 2 decades. After the conference, a smaller group met in an adjacent hall. It was a special session for families of the missing, some with recent cases, others who had been searching for years. Allison and Lucy moved from table to table, listening to stories, offering practical advice, and sharing resources. Sophia worked with a group of young people who had escaped trafficking, helping them process their trauma and rebuild their lives. In a corner, Gloria spoke with an elderly woman whose grandson had disappeared while hiking in Glacier National Park 2 years before. Some days hope is all we have, Gloria told her, taking the woman's hands in her own. But it is enough to keep us searching. Later that night at Lucy's house, the Foundation's core team shared a small celebratory dinner. It had been 3 intense years, filled with hard work, tears, and the small triumphs that fueled their mission. I have an announcement, Sophia said as they finished eating. Everyone turned to her. The Vancouver Center has received a grant to create a special program for undocumented women trapped in trafficking networks. We're calling it Project Eduardo in honor of Gloria's husband. Stunned, Gloria brought a hand to her heart. Eduardo would be so proud, she said, her voice thick with emotion. All he ever wanted was to help those people. And he did, Lucy replied. His courage in taking those photographs, your dedication to keeping the memory of those young men alive, all of it led us to Mark, and through Mark, to everyone else. Detective Garza, who had been invited to the dinner, raised his glass. To Eduardo and Mark, he said, and to all those still waiting to be found. As they all toasted, Allison's phone rang. Seeing the number, she excused herself to answer it. When she returned a few minutes later, her face was a mixture of excitement and shock. "That was Senator Campbell," she announced. "The vote on the bill has been moved up. It's tomorrow, and they want us to be there." A momentary silence fell over the group, followed by an explosion of exclamations and questions. "Tomorrow? In Washington?" Lucy asked, bewildered. "Yes. A private jet will be waiting for us at the Bozeman airport at 6 a.m. The senator has arranged everything." That night, as Allison hastily packed a bag, she found an old photograph on her desk. It showed Mark at 17 standing on Hawks Point, grinning broadly with the Bozeman Valley spread out behind him. She picked it up carefully and tucked it into her purse. The next day, under a warm June sun in Washington, D.C., Lucy, Allison, Sophia, and Gloria, who had insisted on making the trip despite her age, watched as the Mark Reynolds Act passed in the Senate with overwhelming bipartisan support. Senator Campbell, who had championed the legislation, invited them to the podium as she made the official announcement. "This law," the senator declared, "will not only provide critical resources for finding the missing, but it also officially recognizes that every case deserves full attention, regardless of age or circumstance. Families will no longer have to wait 48 hours to report a loved one missing. Federal and state agencies will coordinate their efforts from the very first moment." As the cameras captured the historic moment, Lucy held Allison's hand tightly. In her other hand, she clutched the small medallion she now wore always. A silver circle engraved with the silhouette of a candle and inside a tiny portion of Mark's ashes. "We did it, my son," she whispered. "Your light is still shining." That night on the flight back to Montana, the four women reflected on the journey that had brought them together. A journey that had begun with unspeakable pain, but had evolved into something powerful and transformative. "Do you know what's most extraordinary?" Sophia said, as the plane soared over the Midwestern plains. "That it all started with a simple act of remembrance, a single candle, lit by a woman who refused to forget." Gloria smiled softly. "Sometimes the smallest light is all we need to find our way through the darkness." The October wind howled across the Bozeman cemetery, sweeping golden and crimson leaves between the headstones. 5 years had passed since the discovery of Mark's remains, and the small gathering at his grave had become an annual tradition. This year, however, the group was larger than ever. Lucy Reynolds, now 75, stood by her son's headstone, her hair now completely white, fluttering gently in the wind. Beside her, Allison, who had just turned 43, held a bouquet of sunflowers, Mark's favorite. Gloria Ramirez, confined to a wheelchair by her advanced arthritis, but with eyes as sharp as ever, was pushed by her granddaughter, Carmen. Sophia, who had flown in from Vancouver, kept a protective hand on Lucy's shoulder. But this year, there were new faces. Families from across the country whose loved ones had been found, thanks to the work of the Mark Reynolds Foundation. Some had found happy endings, reunited with people discovered alive. Others, like the Reynolds, had at least found answers, and with them, a sense of closure. 5 years, Lucy began, her voice carried on the wind to those gathered. 5 years since we found Mark, 25 since we lost him, and in these 5 years we have seen changes we never imagined possible. The Foundation's work had grown exponentially. The Mark Reynolds Act, now in its 4th year, had transformed how authorities responded to missing young adults. The alert system and connected database they had developed were now used in every state and were expanding internationally. The 3 survivor centers run by Sophia had helped hundreds of people rebuild their lives after escaping trafficking situations. "I'll never forget the day we got the call about Jacob," said a middle-aged woman who approached Lucy after the ceremony. 3 years he was gone. Thanks to your facial recognition system, someone spotted him working under a fake name on a farm in Oregon. He was so traumatized he couldn't even remember who he really was. Lucy nodded, acknowledging another all-too-familiar story. The traffickers' tactics had evolved, but the Foundation was constantly adapting. Later that evening, at Lucy's house, a smaller group gathered for the annual dinner. Detective Garza, now the state commissioner for missing persons, discussed the latest developments in border legislation with Allison. Jason Miller showed images on his tablet from his new documentary project, which followed 5 families on their search for missing loved ones. "I have some news," Sophia announced once everyone was seated at the table. "The Canadian government has approved the cross-border pilot program. Starting in January, the U.S. and Canadian missing persons databases will be fully integrated." A wave of applause filled the room. It was a project they had fought for years, facing bureaucratic hurdles and concerns over privacy and sovereignty. "And there's more," Sophia continued. "Next week I'm flying to Mexico City. The Mexican government has expressed interest in joining the program." Gloria, who had been unusually quiet, spoke in a voice that was soft but clear. "Eduardo would be so proud. He always said that borders only matter to politicians, not to the people who traffic in human lives." Lucy squeezed her old friend's hand. The bond between them had deepened over the years. 2 women who had lost so much but who had transformed their grief into action. "There's something I want to share with all of you," Lucy said after dinner had ended and they were enjoying coffee and dessert. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, especially since my last checkup." Allison looked at her mother with concern. The results had shown that Lucy's heart was weakening, though she had insisted on keeping it private. "I've decided to establish a trust to ensure the Foundation continues long-term," Lucy explained. "And I also want to announce that I will be donating our family home to become its permanent headquarters when I'm no longer here." A moved silence fell over the room. The Reynolds house, where Mark had grown up, where Lucy had kept his room untouched for so many years, was a powerful symbol for all of them. "Mom," Allison began, but Lucy held up a hand. "It's the right thing to do, honey. This house has always been more than just walls and a roof. It's been a beacon of hope and perseverance. It needs to stay that way." Later that night, after almost everyone had left, Allison found Sophia in Mark's old room. It had been converted into a small museum displaying not just mementos of him, but also the stories of others found through the Foundation. "Do you think we'll ever truly get over what happened?" Allison asked, looking at Mark's old camera, which was displayed under a glass case. Sophia considered the question. "I don't think get over is the right way to put it. I think we learn to carry our experiences in ways that allow us to keep moving forward. Some scars never fade completely. I still have the dream sometimes," Allison confessed. "The one where the phone rings and it's Mark telling me he's okay, that it was all a terrible mistake." "I have dreams too," Sophia replied. "But in mine, we're all back in that bunker. The difference is now, in the dream, I can open the door. I can lead everyone out into the light." The next morning, the Foundation's core group met in the main office, located in a small building near the university campus. On the wall hung a map of the United States covered in small, illuminated dots. Each one represented a missing person. Green dots signified resolved cases. Red ones, open cases. "We got a tip on the Phillips case," Detective Garza reported, pointing to a red dot in Oregon. "Facial recognition got a possible match at a clinic in Tijuana." "I'll contact our team in San Diego," Sophia responded immediately. "They can cross the border today to verify." Gloria, who attended these meetings whenever her health allowed, watched the exchange with a mixture of pride and nostalgia. "Do you know what's most extraordinary?" she said, when there was a pause. "That all of this started with a candle, a single simple candle lit in memory of someone I never even met." Lucy, sitting beside her, nodded. "It's amazing what a small act of remembrance can achieve." That afternoon, as the sun began to set over the Montana mountains, Lucy drove up to Hawks Point alone. It was a hike that grew more difficult each year, but she refused to give it up. This place, where Mark had spent so many hours looking out at the world, had become her personal sanctuary. She sat on the flat rock where a small memorial plaque now rested. The wind was gentler up here, almost a whisper. "It's been 5 years, Mark," she said aloud. "5 years since we found you. 25 since we lost you. And there is so much to tell you." Lucy spoke for nearly an hour, sharing with her absent son all the developments of the past year. The Foundation's successes, the international expansion, the lives that had been changed. She spoke of Allison and her unwavering dedication, of Sophia and the centers she ran, of Gloria and her continued courage in the face of her failing health. "Sometimes I wonder what you would think of all this," she said finally. "How your disappearance sparked something so big, so important. I like to think you'd be proud, that you'd understand that in some way your life continues through every person we find, every family that gets answers." As the sky turned to purple and the first stars began to appear, Lucy took a small votive candle protected in a glass jar from her pocket. She lit it carefully and placed it beside the plaque. "I'm still lighting candles for you, my son," she whispered, "and I will, for as long as I live." From the valley below, Allison watched the small light on the mountain. She had wanted to go with her mother, but Lucy had insisted on going alone. Now, as she gazed at that tiny point of light against the vastness of the mountain and the sky, Allison understood something profound. That sometimes the most powerful memory isn't the one that clings to the past, but the one that illuminates a path to the future. And in that moment, under the starry Montana sky, Mark Reynolds' legacy shone brighter than ever. Not just in the candle his mother had lit, but in the countless lives his story had touched and transformed. Dawn's light filtered through the windows of what was once the Reynolds house, and was now the headquarters of the Mark Reynolds Foundation. 10 years had passed since the discovery of Mark's remains, 30 since his disappearance. The house, renovated but retaining its original character, hummed with activity even at this early hour. Allison, now 48, crossed the threshold that had once been her family's front door, and which now served as the entrance to a nerve center dedicated to finding the missing. Her brown hair showed the first streaks of silver, and fine lines marked a face that had lived intensely. But her eyes held the same determination that had driven her for 3 decades. "Good morning, Dr. Reynolds," greeted Maya Chen, a 25-year-old coordinating the volunteer program. "The video conference with the Vancouver office starts in 15 minutes. Allison nodded, heading toward her office, formerly her father's study. On the walls, alongside academic degrees and awards, hung photographs that told the Foundation's story. The official opening with Lucy cutting the ribbon, Gloria Ramirez receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom 5 years prior, Sophia testifying before the United Nations on human trafficking, and of course Mark, whose youthful smile presided over it all from an enlarged photograph above the fireplace. Lucy Reynolds had passed away 3 years earlier at the age of 82. To the very end, she had maintained her tradition of hiking to Hawks Point each month to light a candle, accompanied in her final years by Allison or by Foundation volunteers. Her ashes, following her wishes, had been scattered in that very spot, finally rejoining Mark's spirit in the place they had both loved. "We have an update on the Ramirez case," announced Miguel Garza Jr. son of the now retired detective who had followed in his father's footsteps and now worked as the liaison between the foundation and law enforcement. Facial recognition found an 89% match on a security recording in Phoenix. The conference room, once the Reynolds family dining room, was now equipped with state-of-the-art technology. A large screen displayed interactive maps, databases, and live feeds from the Foundation's various branches, which now included offices in 7 U.S. cities, 3 in Canada, and 2 in Mexico. "Excellent," Allison replied. "Contact our team in Arizona immediately and notify the Ramirez family, but with the usual precautions about managing expectations." The video conference began on time. On the screen, several faces appeared, including Sophia's, now 58. Connecting from Vancouver, where she directed the Foundation's international division. Beside her was Carmen Ramirez, Gloria's granddaughter, who had joined the organization after her grandmother's death 2 years ago. "We have good news from Mexico," Sophia reported. "The pilot program in Chihuahua has located 15 people in the last 6 months, 13 of them alive." Allison felt the familiar surge of satisfaction that came with this kind of news. Each person found represented a family that had answers, a family that had escaped the limbo of uncertainty she and her mother had known for so many years. The meeting continued with updates on new case, technological advances, and legislative challenges. The Foundation, which had begun as a small family effort, now employed over 200 people and coordinated thousands of volunteers across 3 countries. Its integrated alert and database system had become the international standard for missing persons cases, and its model for supporting trafficking survivors was being replicated globally. After the meeting, Allison went to what had been Mark's room, now an educational museum. School and university groups visited regularly to learn about the case that had transformed how the country addressed the disappearance of young adults. 30 years, Mark," she murmured, adjusting a frame that held the disposable camera she had given him on his last day. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Other times it feels like a lifetime ago." Her phone vibrated with a message. "Confirmed. Positive match in Phoenix. It's Ernesto Ramirez." Allison closed her eyes for a moment, absorbing the news. Ernesto, 19, had disappeared 8 months ago after leaving his job at a restaurant in Tucson. He was no relation to Gloria, but the shared surname had made the case resonate deeply with the Foundation's veteran members. That afternoon, Allison drove to the cemetery. Mark's grave was now flanked by those of his parents, Daniel and Lucy. In front of them stood a small monument, a bronze flame perpetually burning, powered by solar energy. A plaque read, "For all those still waiting to be found, the search never ends." "We found another one, Mom," Allison said, placing fresh flowers on Lucy's grave. "Ernesto. He's alive. He was working under a fake name, probably a victim of labor trafficking. The Phoenix team is with him now." After the cemetery, as she did every year on this date, Allison drove up to Hawks Point. The walk was easier now, thanks to an improved trail, part of a community project in Lucy's honor. At the top, she found several people already gathered. Among them stood Sophia, who had flown in especially for the occasion, Carmen Ramirez, Jason Miller, whose documentary on the Foundation had earned an Emmy 5 years prior, and Commissioner Garza, now retired but a constant presence at their anniversaries. They were joined by the many survivors and families the Foundation had helped throughout the years. "Welcome to our 30th anniversary," Allison said as they all formed a circle around the commemorative plaque. 30 years since Mark disappeared, 10 since we found him, 3 since Mom left us. And yet somehow they are all still here with us. One by one they lit small candles, their flames sheltered within glass jars, and placed them in a circle. The tradition Gloria had once begun alone in a small chapel had now expanded to hundreds of communities across 3 countries. the Day of the Candles observed annually to remember the missing and celebrate the found. This year, Allison continued, the foundation has helped locate 213 people. 162 were found alive. For the others, at least their families now have answers, a place to mourn, a path toward acceptance. Sophia stepped forward. We have also helped more than 500 survivors rebuild their lives after escaping trafficking situations. Our centers now offer not only shelter and therapy, but also education, job training, and legal support. Carmen spoke of the educational program named for her grandmother, designed to raise awareness about human trafficking in vulnerable communities along the borders. Jason shared news of his new documentary series, which was following the Foundation's work in real time. As the sun began to set, bathing the Montana mountains in hues of gold and crimson, Allison gazed out at the valley below. The town of Boltzmann had grown in these 3 decades, but the mountains remained immutable, eternal witnesses to the small human lives that flourished and faded at their feet. I sometimes wonder, Sophia said softly, moving closer to Allison, what would have become of us all if Mark hadn't disappeared that day? If he had just come home as planned? Allison considered the question. I suppose it's impossible to know, but I like to think that somehow everything we've accomplished is part of his legacy, that his life, though cut far too short, has meant something greater than any of us could have ever imagined. As darkness began to fall, the candles burned brighter against the deepening sky. From the valley, they looked like fallen stars resting on the mountain, a beacon for anyone who was lost and searching for the way home. There's something Mom used to say, Allison shared as they all prepared to descend, that as long as we keep a light on for the absent, they are never truly lost. I think she was right. Not just about Mark, but about all those we continue to search for. Later that night, as Allison prepared for sleep in the small cabin she'd built near the old family home, she looked one last time at the photograph of her complete family, Mark, Daniel, Lucy, and herself, smiling at a summer picnic so many years ago before everything changed. We did it, Mark, she whispered. Your light never went out. On the contrary, it has ignited thousands more. As she turned off her lamp, she knew that tomorrow would bring new cases, new searches, new stories of loss, and hopefully of reunion. The work would never truly be over. There would always be someone searching for a loved one, someone needing a candle lit in the darkness. But thanks to a young man who had vanished 30 years ago, thanks to a mother who never gave up, thanks to an old woman who kept the memory of strangers alive, and thanks to all who had carried on their legacy, that search was no longer a solitary path. It was a shared light, shining across borders and generations, guiding the lost back home.